switching gears here away from end states. What's your take on the FTX founder? I guess they call him SBF.
Yeah, honestly, it's incredibly disappointing. I mean, he was positioning himself as the adult in the room in crypto, and I am, going to be the regulated exchange, and I'm going to professionalize this space. And he ended up being the biggest scammer of them all, right? I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out, and obviously it's all still alleged. The best case scenario is that he was massively incompetent, right? When he was positioning himself as very competent and super sophisticated and trustworthy. At best, he was incompetent, and at worst, it was, fraudulent and criminal. So it's just a mess of a situation. It makes everyone's job in the industry a whole lot harder to, scratch and claw for every ounce of legitimacy for each high profile scam and blow up. It just makes people that much more skeptical. Luckily for us, we provide a real actual physical product that can wrap their heads around, and the crypto component of it or the blockchain component of it is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the entire puzzle. So we're a little bit insulated from it, but it definitely makes everyone's jobs more difficult.
Yeah, I guess especially since it's such a new area or field. So would an old school analogy be just because one bank happened to take your money and run doesn't mean that all the other banks are bad?
Yeah, the bank analogy is tough because so many people think of crypto as just purely financial when there's a lot more to the blockchain ecosystem as a whole. But yeah, I mean, that's an apt analogy where, just because one player or many players in the space were irresponsible or, were bad actors doesn't mean that everyone in the space is. And there's still so much more volume of legitimate, great work happening in the space. It just doesn't get the headlines.
Wow, crazy. So how do you see blockchain and crypto kind of evolving? So look, 5-10 years down the road.
I think the crypto and blockchain will have made it when people stop talking about it, right? When it kind of fades into the background as a technology that enables these better experiences, right? So Bitcoin is a store of value, and it allows you to send money across the world instantaneously for very low fees, right? So you don't have to wait for ACH clearing. You don't have to initiate a wire. There's no borders. It just moves at the speed of the internet. And when that goes into the background and people don't have to learn totally new behaviors, they'll have to learn some new behaviors, but when it's more seamless, I think that will be a success. Similar with NFTs, right? NFTs, the technology, it's essentially an empty data payload, right? Think of it like a PDF. It's almost like a file format, right? So people saying I hate NFTs or, kind of saying oh, I hate PDFs. They don't really hate NFTs. They hate the specific use case or specific set of content that has been embodied in NFTs. But the technology of having a cryptographically verifiable digital asset that is provably scarce is a huge innovation from, things like having, everyone always gives the example of liens or real estate leases, on the blockchain and, being able to transact through smart contracts. For example, parametric insurance. This is one I always give in my class, right? So you have a smart contract that says, if my flight is delayed by more than 2 hours, automatically pay out my policy, right? So all of that happens through a contract. There's no intermediary. There's no filing a claim. This smart contract looks at the global database of flights. The second my flight is more than 2 hours delayed, my policy pays out. And all of that happens seamlessly, right? So there's a lot of efficiencies that can happen that will facilitate better product experiences, and people may not even necessarily know what's happening in the background. That's what I think the bull case for the industry is.
Gotcha. And then what do you say to people that say, oh, Bitcoin's just for drug dealers and smugglers that want to kind of hide their transactions?
I'd say Bitcoin is a really bad way to do that. I think it was a good way to do it for about, maybe 3 or 4 years in the early to mid 2010s. But there's been so many cases of high profile criminals, including the Silk Road, which was this, open marketplace for any asset that was using Bitcoin because they thought it was censorship resistant and completely anonymous. They found out the hard way that it was pseudonymous, and there's sort of forensics you can do on Bitcoin transactions to trace it to real people. So there are other cryptocurrencies that could, be a better facilitator of illicit activity, but Bitcoin is a really bad one because the on-chain analytics are so good at this point. The other thing I'd say is that, like, the US dollar itself facilitates a lot of illicit activity, and people aren't saying the US dollar is
Right.
a bad thing or, a fundamentally for criminals, even though, I don't know, you read stats that like something like 40% of US dollars can have trace amounts of cocaine on them or something, right? Like all this crazy stuff that happens that, people don't blame the US dollar for. It's the criminal activity. I think the same argument applies to Bitcoin, right? It's whatever you make of it, most people are not using it for criminal activity.
Yeah. So the Bitcoin really could be, by definition, it's a true global currency.
Yeah, that's right. It's
So-
completely borderless.
So would you ever envision where every country gets rid of their own currency and then Bitcoin is the one global currency?
I don't think every country would, because there's so much geopolitics involved in having your own currency and the relative strength of your own currency. But it's possible that every country will issue their own cryptocurrency, like a digital dollar or digital yuan, which we're already seeing. I also think that smaller countries who sort of don't benefit from having their own currency may adopt it as their currency, because it is sort of less. They're not empowering any one nation state by having it as their reserve currency, as opposed to being US dollar denominated or trying to prop up their own currency has all of these other implications associated with it. We're already seeing a few countries like El Salvador accept it as legal tender. I think in the future we'll see more countries do the same, especially for smaller economies who aren't really players on the global stage. Of people aren't transacting in their currencies for international deals. I think it could become a backbone of the international financial system.
Wow, amazing. So if I were a Wall Street analyst in charge of making money for my clients, so say I work at Fidelity and I run the blockchain and crypto practice, for lack of better words, and I called you and I said, hey, Bennett, I'm kind of in this space and trying to make people money, kind of where are the opportunities to make money and what are the ones to avoid?
Yeah, I'm not the right guy to ask about that. I don't, I'm not a crypto investor, right? I just sort of use the technology now on two businesses that I've started, but I've probably made embarrassingly little amount of money on crypto investments as someone who's so involved in the space. So I'm not the right guy to ask there.
Well, obviously buying the your sneakers or any sneakers that End State comes out with, that would be one way, right?
Right. Yeah, of course.
Do you have a subscription service where any sneaker that comes, it's almost like the wine, right? Where they've got Silver Oak or whatever has, or Ferraris, right? They have a very, very limited, you have to be on the exclusive list. Do you ever see you coming up with some exclusive list where, hey, every new sneaker that comes out, you got right a first refusal?
Yeah, we actually, so our first ever sneaker drop that we did last year, the people who bought that and own the NFT have the right to buy into each subsequent drop. So that was one of the perks of buying into the first sneaker drop. And it's all mediated through the NFT, right? So how do we know who's on the list to buy? Prove you on the NFT, and then you can buy into the subsequent drop.
Wow. And has there already been, if you can comment, kind of, I'll say resales, where there's been kind of proven, markup and profit?
Yeah. So our first drop, there's a pretty significant resale market, and the floor price for the first drop is over $1,000. So, the sort of the cheapest NFT that's for sale on secondary is over $1,000. One of the big pieces that's missing is something that accounts for the physical component, right? So there's a ton of NFT marketplaces and secondary marketplaces for NFTs, but not necessarily something that accounts for the physical product. So we see that as something that needs to be solved before there can be significant secondary transaction volume for End State sneakers.
Gotcha. Amazing. So what about any kind of fond memories or stories or something that we may not realize about kind of your crypto and blockchain journey?
I don't know if it's a fond memory, but it was something that was really formative. So when we were negotiating the deal for Cognate to be acquired by GoDaddy, flew back from GoDaddy HQ in San Francisco. I went to play basketball on a Saturday morning at Titus Sparrow Park in the South End in Boston. And I got my legs taken out from under me and I shattered my elbow. And so I had to have emergency surgery. And then first one didn't go great. I had to have another emergency surgery like a week and a half later. And all the while I was trying to negotiate this acquisition between Cognate and GoDaddy. And it was a really, really interesting experience, but it was also just sort of in the middle of like this first crypto bull run when there was this huge consciousness around, what was happening in the space. And even though that particular incident obviously is not a fond memory, it was just such a really interesting time where so many things happened in rapid succession that it always stands out in my mind as a formative part of my story and, sort of my journey in the blockchain and crypto space.
Wow. Amazing. Was Blake Irving the CEO then?
No. So it was, Blake had left, I think maybe like a year prior to when we were acquired.
Wow. Interesting. Very cool. All right. So I'm going to be wrapping up. So if there's any questions or comments, definitely fascinating. Please type them in. So maybe for yourself, assume you've had some mentors over your career, correct?
That's right.
What type of advice have you received?
In the startup world, done is better than perfect is the biggest piece of advice that sticks with me to this day. Obviously, there's a lot of judgment calls that you have to make around what product areas that applies to. When done is better than perfect, doesn't apply 100% of cases, but most of the time, it's really, really helpful and good advice. I, as a perfectionist, really struggled with that for my first business and shipping things that weren't quite ready or weren't as good as they could be. At some point, you just got to let go and move fast enough, and you don't have the luxury of getting things to be perfect. So that's the big one that it always sticks with me.
Well, what about any advice? You're still kind of on the young side, at least compared to me, but kind of what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Aside from don't go play basketball that Saturday morning, you mean? I think getting comfortable with failure is such a big component of being successful in business, startups in particular, and not being afraid of what other people think, or no one really cares what no one cares what you're doing, or cares about your failures or successes, which once you realize is kind of liberating, right? Like, okay, I can have this product launch, it doesn't go the way I want it to. People might like leave a couple comments and then they forget about it for the rest of their life. Being comfortable with that and, taking negative feedback and taking your lumps and having people saying, this is dumb, or I don't get it. Being able to shrug that off, like the sooner you can really immunize yourself from those comments and those feelings, the better you're going to be.
Wow. Awesome. Very, very, very cool. So it's been awesome having you. Really appreciate it, and definitely look forward to following along. And after we hang up here, I'm going to ask you a couple other questions of interest. And what else do we have? So Tucker, thanks for your help behind the scenes. We also have Tucker. I don't know if you can post or not, but for anybody that's watching, we just realized a week or so ago that it helps us to have 5-star ratings. So if you go on Apple Podcast and type in Tech Sales Insight, you'll see the podcasts that come up. And if you scroll down to the very bottom, you can give a review and hit 5-star. And Tucker, hopefully I explained that properly. And in the past week, I looked this morning, I think we're up to 81 5-star reviews. So that's good. But Bennett, definitely awesome, definitely fascinating in terms of what you have going on with N-State. So this whole NFT sneaker thing, go check out N-State, get in touch with Bennett, and wish you the best in your growing family, most importantly. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Randy. It was fun.